Welcome back, honors. I know it's weird, 2022 flip, starting out with the fact that I'm standing up. Now, the big thing about it, though, is we're going to be diving headfirst into our current unit, right? We're going to be talking about exploration, even though it's not really like exploring as much because people already knew it was there. But still, the big thing that we're going to be doing is we're moving into this 6th unit, right? And so this 6th unit is going to be focused completely around the ideas of Europeans interacting with new peoples and new lands that they had never actually seen before. And this, of course, being a Western civilizations class, we do study the documentation and the evidence that kind of emits from the continent of Europe, right? So the big thing about it, though, is we're going to be talking about major events that you might have already heard of before a little bit. We're going to be talking about Magellan and his attempt to circumnavigate the planet. We're going to talk about Christopher Columbus and the fact that he ran into the Caribbean and opened an entire new, market demographic to the entirety of the rest of the world, right? We're going to talk about the conquistadors in their direct and terrible treatment of natives of North and South America in particular. Now, the big reason why I am standing, just to give you a heads up, is while we talk about those things, I sometimes need to be able to kind of point things out on a map or be able to draw something, right, for you to be able to understand it as much as you possibly can, right? Now, I also know that sometimes the screen doesn't necessarily record. You get these goofy little black lines on there and stuff like that every now and again, but don't worry. I'm going to make sure that this is ink that you can actually see really well and that you actually can imbibe a little bit. But let's go ahead and get after it, right? Let's get after it, and let's talk about the stuff that happened before Columbus, right? So, the big thing about it, though, is most of you learned in 5th grade when you talked about 1492, Columbus and blue and Santa Maria. When y'all talk about that goofy little stuff, the big thing about it is the world and the history of the world is actually really, really, long and has a massive amount of content that happens before he makes this giant mistake of finding something he didn't even intend to find, right? So we're going to jump head first into this first section. We're going to talk about the world before Columbus and exploration, right? So the big thing about it, though, whenever you get into trying to understand this content, you have to understand is that if we rewind back to the period that we refer to as the Middle Ages, right? If we go backwards and we go from the period of time from about 500 AD to about 1500 AD, the big thing you have to understand and know is that the rest of the world doing just fine, right? So, I don't know if we talked about that already or not, or if we really got into that stuff a little bit, but the big thing that we need to understand is that during this time period, right, as we already should know, is that you've got a lot of intense things going on. The Indian Ocean, the monsoon marketplace. We already know that, though, right? We already know about the monsoon marketplace. We already talked about that during our Middle Ages unit, but just to kind of rehash it a little bit, we know that the Indian Ocean right here was a center of trade for a very, 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 very long period of time. We know that right around here, you have a large amount of money being made off seasonal winds that are blowing back and forth through the Asiatic continent, through the Indian Ocean, and bringing things from Africa, like gold, salt, and ivory. The Arabs are actually trading everything back and forth. You got the Asiatic Kingdoms bringing silks, science, tea, all these different items going through this entire area. So the big thing about that, though, is this period of time directly relates to the period of exploration. This period of time that we already learned about in our Middle Ages unit relates to the period of exploration because Europeans want to get in on this stuff, right? So, and you can see the dramatic growth of the Asiatic kingdoms, right? For example, you have guys like Zhang He, which is, I'm going to say it, of course, with an English accent and all this other stuff because I don't know how to properly pronounce his name, just to give you a little heads up. But the biggest thing about it, though, is this Chinese admiral is a beacon of understanding that the Asiatic and Eastern kingdoms during this whole time period had already been exploring. They had already done all this stuff, right? They'd already gone back and forth. They had already discovered most of the things in this area, okay? He is a Chinese admiral that took 7 voyages back and forth from China throughout the Indian Ocean and the monsoon marketplace, over 12,000 miles, and he traded and explored everything he could get his hands on throughout that entire area. And so much so that he actually created these giant treasure ships to carry all of his goods back and forth. That right there is the size of a boat that Christopher Columbus took. That right there is the size of a Zhang He treasure ship that would bring gold, silks, salts, ivory, all these different things all over the Indian Ocean. So as we can see, the Asiatic kingdoms and the Arab kingdoms and the African kingdoms were the ones that actually knew how to explore the oceans long before the Columbus and the Europeans ever could, because the Columbus and the Europeans were stuck in the Middle Ages from the areas of about 700 to about 1500 AD, right? So now the thing about it going forward, though, is also, just so you know, Columbus was not the very first person to try and discover routes to get to these all-important places, right? Everybody everybody wants to get to one key area, right? If I blow myself up right here real quick, if I show you, everyone wants to get there, right? So everybody in the world, this part of the world anyway right now, because we're pretending right now that no one knows what this is, okay? No one knows that that's there. Everyone wants to get here, right? Why does everyone want to get there? Because they want to start getting into the spice trade, right? Because spices are going to be the biggest product going in and out of Europe during this time period. It shows wealth, it shows prosperity, it shows that you can make an excessive amount of money, right? So the thing about it is the Asiatic kingdoms with Zheng could easily get here, the Africans could easily get here, and they were trading this entire area, okay? Now the thing about it though is Europeans want to figure out how to get there. Problem is they have to take a different route, okay? Some of y'all are probably thinking to yourself a little bit, you're like, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, how come, and this is one of those moments where you might want to take down some little notes, or maybe just like screenshot this or something like that if you want to. Mr. Terry, why didn't they just, like instead of going like all the way around, how come they didn't just cut through this area right here, like Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, and North Africa? Couldn't they have just easily cut through this area, right? Couldn't like Columbus, who was like from this part of Italy, just like come and gone through there, right? Couldn't he have just gone that way? Problem is he can't, mainly due to the type of religion the people are that live there, right? This right here is the Islamic, this is the Islamic Kingdoms, right? So the Islamic Kingdoms, ever since the Crusades, do not allow Christian traders to travel through their empires, right? So that was not a route that they could go on. So a lot of people then ask themselves, like, well, wait a minute, why can't we go through Mongolia, right? So, like, why don't we just hook a Louis up through here and come at India from the top, right? So, like, well, you wouldn't have been the first one to have that idea. The very first one to have that idea was a very famous explorer by the name of Marco Polo, right? Marco Polo was a Venetian explorer. He was from Venice, up here in the top right corner of Italy, and he was the first one to try and record and report his findings traveling through Mongolia, trying to get to India, right? Now, the thing about it was, though, is he never got there, right? Why did he never get there? Because you learned this in human geography with Mr. Wooderson. There is a massive mountain range right here in the northern area of Italy, known as the India, that is known as the Himalayas. So he couldn't actually cross it. So he ended up just kind of bouncing around through the Chinese Empire and then eventually going back through the Mongolian Empire and coming back to Italy. So he couldn't go that way either, right? So like we learned that we cannot get to India going through this way. And some of you are saying, well, why can't you just pick up spices here in China and stuff like that? The thing about it is that's going to make them more expensive. That's not why Europeans wanted to get there. The Europeans wanted to figure out a way to get to India to buy the spices directly from Indians so they can then actually sell them for an excessive amount of money, right? So, like, also the thing about it that you need to understand, too, is we don't even know if Marco Polo went to all these places like he said. Because when he came back, he starts reporting on a lot of his findings that he found. And a lot of his findings were of, like, beasts that he saw, right? A lot of his findings were about crazy humans that he saw with like giant feet and faces in their chests and wolf heads and stuff like that. And then also, another big thing that happens is Marco Polo was a part of a very large contingent of people during the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, that believed that there were lost Christian communities out there of European descendant people that they needed to try and go out and find. So one of the other big motivators for exploration during the Middle Ages was to try and find people that they thought lived down here in sub-Saharan Africa, and they believed that a man named Prester John, meaning Priest John, actually lived in Africa, and that they needed to go out and find him. So the Europeans during the Middle Ages, much like Marco Polo, believed that a European guy named John lived in Africa and that they needed to go find him because he was a follower of Christ, right? This whole story and these like goofy pictures of this stuff is just to show you that still, during the Middle Ages, the Europeans were not ready to actually find these different routes to get to India. They didn't have the intelligence, like the value of intelligence to get there at this point. Whereas the Africans did. They didn't have that depth of knowledge to be able to get them there, right? They can't cut through this way because those are the Islamic kingdoms. They can't go through this way because of geographic restrictions, right? So now going into it, though, some of y'all are probably thinking like, oh, but wait, so did they ever really need to explore anything, though, also? Because on the eve of the Renaissance, the Italian states are bringing in spices and things like that. Well, yeah, looking at the Italian Renaissance, you also have to understand that economically speaking, the Italian states of Genoa and Venice are controlling a lot of the goods that get to Europe. Because these two places control two all-important bodies of water, the Black Sea and also the Mediterranean, right? So if I actually circle it right here on this map, if you look down here over your right, the Mediterranean Sea is right here. Genoa, which is on the west side of Italy, and Venice, which is on the east side of Italy, controlled goods that went into Europe that were actually luxury items. Thing about it is they're very big rivals, right? Venice was the biggest one that won out, right? Venice was a major importer of spices, silks, carpets, hot items in Europe, right? Things that everyone wanted, like Christmas in 1505, everybody wanted spices, silks, and carpets, right? They traded Easterners gold and cash from these banks that they were actually establishing in Florence, and they also gave them European goods, which nobody really wanted, but the Easterners took them anyway, and for their wares, right? And so they traded those spices and silks and carpets for basically cash straight up. But for the Venetians to make money off of that trade, they then had to charge more money for their goods back in Europe, right? So as you can see, once we're looking at this, look at this real quick, okay? Well, if we try to understand Venice, which is right here, they are getting these spices after they've been traded by Arabs to Saudi Arabia, after they traveled over land, after they've gone through the Ottoman Empire, and then a Venetian ship had to go pick them up and then bring them back. For every single leg of this trip, every time these spices changed hands, the price on them went up, right? So you've got the increasing price of spices going as the stuff is moving towards Europe, making them extremely expensive. Now, that's good if you're Venetian, because you can sell them for a lot of money, but it's not good if you're in one of these other European countries that want to buy them for a cheaper price or possibly sell them yourself. So everyone sees Venice making this ridiculous amount of money, and Genoa hates this, right? Genoa doesn't like this because they want to be the ones making this very, very large amount of money during this time period. Problem is they only control trade that's coming out of here, the Black Sea, which is actually at the southern area of Russia, right? So they control also a northern route in Africa because they made an agreement with some of the Islamic kingdoms in Africa to move some wares through there. They were the very first people to also give it a shot and try to explore the Atlantic. They sent a bunch of boats out there, but none of them made it back alive, and they all died, right? They shifted their focus mainly to the Mediterranean after Venice realized they could lock down the spice trade, right? Now, when Venice locks down the spice trade in the 1200s, the 1300s, this is a thing that directly leads to the Renaissance, right? So in the 1400s, you're going to start seeing art pop up and banks pop up to start storing all of this money that's coming into Italy. That right there is why the Renaissance starts in Italy, and it's another big motivator for these other Europeans to try and explore some different stuff, right? So why didn't the Europeans try exploring before now, right? Now we're mainly talking about non-Italians, right? Why aren't some of these Italians, because remember, Marco Polo was from Venice. He was trying to figure out a way to get these products for cheaper by going straight to India, just realized he couldn't get there, right? So how come all these other Europeans, why didn't England figure out a way to get to India sooner? Why didn't France do this? Looking back at those pictures of dudes with faces on their chests and giant feet and people thinking that a white guy named Prester John lives down here in Africa, obviously, it's a dearth of knowledge, right? They don't have enough stuff. And particularly when it comes to their stuff, they didn't have enough technology, right? The Europeans needed certain technological goods to be able to explore these giant areas over here and also to be able to navigate them effectively. Now, some of these pieces of technology include things like a caravel, right? A caravel is a European-style ship modeled off of Eastern-style triangular sails, right? So the thing you need to understand about boats that Europeans were using leading into the period of exploration, which is basically the 1400s, right? Boats that Europeans were using all had square sails on them, right? And all of that, the problem with that is you can only sail one direction with a square-sailed ship. You can only go with the wind. You can never go against it, right? So they adopted these triangular-sailed, small, lighter caravels after modeling them off of Asiatic and Arabic-style ships so they can actually sail into the wind. So a key thing we're understanding right here is The Easterners came up with this stuff already. The Europeans are now finally just getting to access it using cultural diffusion, right? Another big Arabic device that is necessary for actual like trading along the monsoon marketplace and doing all this stuff is known as a fly compass, right? A fly compass is a compass that has a magnet inside of it that is like attracted to the magnetic pole of the Earth, the North Pole of the Earth, right? And so that way they can actually see which direction they're navigating on their map at any given time: north, south, east, west, southeast, southwest, right? Another big one was this thing called an astrolabe, right? An astrolabe is key in the science of cartography. Jot that down, right? Cartography. The astrolabe is what you use to try and jot down or chart or track the position of the North Star, right? And what you do is you use an astrolabe to measure the angle of the North Star to the horizon. And that tells you what latitude you are on the planet, right? So that way you can actually design cartographic maps, and you can use an astrolabe to pinpoint your location on the Earth, right? These three things were created by Easterners. The Europeans just finally got a chance to get a hold of them. Now, some of you are also saying, it's like, well, Mr. Terry, I thought they thought the Earth was flat, and that's why they never got a chance to go and explore stuff. No, that's not true at all right? They did not think that the Earth was flat. They knew that the Earth was not flat. The thing about it is the ancient Greeks knew that the Earth wasn't flat. Ptolemy's geography, which is going to become majorly popular in about 150 AD, created by the Greek scientist Ptolemy, shows that the world is round, right? So Europeans in the 1400s knew the world was round. They just didn't know how to navigate the areas of the map that they didn't know existed, right? They only thought that this part of the world existed. They had no idea that there were two continents over here, okay? So also, wait a second, I have a new idea. Why don't we all just keep hucking through Mongolia and maybe set up port cities in places like Thailand and stuff like that, right? Problem is, you can't go through Mongolia now because they also converted to Islam, which means every Christian navigator is now like, ugh, why would you do that? Because now you have no way of going through this direction or North Africa, and basically, Europe is religiously landlocked and geographically landlocked into trying to figure out a way to get to India that cannot include going through Asia or going through the Middle East, right? So the thing about it, though, going on to it, is the Ottomans are going to take power as trading rulers. The Byzantine city of Constantinople is going to fall, and the Ottomans lock down spice trade they actually do this for the next about 100 years, right? The Europeans are going to become dependent on Muslim middlemen that bring the price up on the goods they want, right? So the thing about it is, though, is that the world map at the time looked a little something like this, right? So everybody believed that the world emanated out of Jerusalem, which is why that is the exact middle of this world map. But as you can see, this right here was the globe that came out the same month that Christopher Columbus was about to travel on his journey, right? As you can see, they believed the Earth is round. They just had no idea that the world was much bigger than they actually thought, right? So going into it, though, who do you think out of all these countries is going to be the very first one to try and get involved in this trade, right? One country comes up with an idea. They're right here on the western side of Europe, and they say, I want to go around Africa, right? So, the Portuguese come up with a big, bad idea, and they're like, wait a minute, there's one idea we haven't thought of. I know we can't go this way because of the Himalayas, also because it's cold here 6 months out of the year, right, in Siberia, and also because the Mongolians have converted to Islam. I know that we can't go through the Middle East here in North Africa because those people are Islamic and they don't allow us to travel through there, right? The Portuguese rulers, though, particularly this guy named Prince Henry the Navigator, comes up with an idea to leave Portugal and go around Africa using these new caravel-style ships, their compasses, and their astrolabes, right? So Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal wants to increase Portuguese commercial holdings, and he wants to find this proverbial thing that he calls the River of Gold, right? So his plan is, right here, to leave Portugal and decide to bounce around Africa until he can finally figure out a way to get all the way to India, right? The only problem with this idea is that they have no idea how large Africa is in a grand scale, right? The Portuguese decided to start doing this navigation around Africa in the hopes of finding new assets and new goods. The Azore Islands, which are actually right off here, they discover on their voyages. They're uninhabited. They start to use them to farm sugarcane, right? So, the big thing about it is the Portuguese are the very first ones to try and get to Africa. And a lot of historians will tell you that the motivations that were driving them to do this were gold, God glory, right? Be the first European power to get to India and get your glory. Be the first European power to go through Africa and convert them to Christianity. And be the first European power to go around Africa, find places to grow sugarcane, and make a ton of money off those spices, right? Gold, God, glory, okay? They are going to create trade posts at all these inlets all around Africa, and they're going to begin to use this as a way to move their goods around. Problem is, they don't even get around the bottom of Africa until the 1490s, so it does take them quite some time. The big early items that they are trading before they ever get to India is actually stuff that came from the west coast of Africa. They create a gold trade, and they also begin to trade slaves back to Europe as well, which is where the transatlantic slave trade truly begins, right, with the Portuguese. So the thing about it, though, is like I just said, when you're looking at this map, you have to understand that Portugal's plan is to go all the way around Africa. But it takes them decades to get all the way to down here, right? So, like, it takes them a very, very long time to get to the bottom of Africa. And when they get down there, they realize that the weather is not really agreeing with them that much, right? So the Portuguese, like, basically begin to base their entire economy off slave trading and sugarcane, okay? And they are going to begin to pivot from a Black Sea trade to an African-based slave trade. Now, the big thing about this going into it is, just so you have an understanding, is that most of these slaves that are going to be brought from Western Africa are going to be brought on Portuguese vessels, right? So the Portuguese, though, however, feel that they are not making enough money off of these two ideas, one being the most horrific thing that's ever happened in all of history, and the second one being them, of course, just trying to, like, farm sugar. Now, the thing is, they want to get to India. Their original goal was always to get to India, but they have to figure out how to get past that bottom edge of Africa. The issues that they're having is once they got down here, there are windstorms, large ice storms, and hurricanes that are going on down there. The very first Portuguese sailor to get to the bottom of Africa is a guy by the name of Bartholomew Diaz. And Bartholomew Diaz gets down there, and he names that body of water the Cape of Storms, right? He says, if you go down here, there is a high likelihood that your ship will sink because it will be destroyed by a storm, right? He is the first one to get here, and he has to turn around and go back to Portugal because he can't make it past this thing he's named the Cape of Storms. But then a guy comes along by the name of Vasco da Gama, who actually makes the full trip all the way around India, all the way around the bottom of Africa, all the way to India, and he is the first one to get there to India, bring 4 boats and 170 men, and he brings those spices all the way back, right? But here's the thing. After he does this, he renames this area of water at the bottom of Africa. And he says, do not call it the Cape of, like, Storms. Call it instead the Cape of Good Hope, right? So, like, he calls it the Cape of Good Hope because he believes that if you can get past this area, then you can get to India if you can get there, right? We'll talk a little bit more about Vasco da Gama's voyage. I know that was a lot of content for a flip of your first one back, but it's going to be okay. I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.